your home is situated in respect to the lot, and if you have any utility easements or anything like that on it. Now, utility easements do not mean that you can't plant in that area. It just means if CPS or SAWS or whoever finds it necessary to come in and rip the place up, they are under no obligation to replace what they tear up. If they tear up something on your property, yeah, it's their obligation to fix it. If it's in a utility easement, they're under no obligation. Maybe if they're nice people, they will come back and do it. If they're not the city's road crew that wants to take 4 years to widen the street 18 inches. But anyway, that's what you should keep in mind when it comes to utility easements. I would be reluctant to put big trees in a utility easement because, again, that's a big loss if you lose it. Home I used to live in when I lived in San Antonio several years ago, I had my vegetable garden over the utility easement. That way, if they decided to come in and work on something, which they never did, you know, all I'd lose would be a few veggies that were going to be gone in a few months anyway. But begin by doing your drawing to scale, and locating the house on it, and make very careful notation of which way the property faces and everything like that. Keep in mind that the sun moves throughout the year, and what is very shady in the summer may be very sunny in the winter, or vice versa. And if your lot comes with existing trees, keep in mind whether those trees are evergreen or deciduous. I see a lot of people with pecan trees where it's too shady underneath the tree to hardly grow grass. So what do? They go in and plant a beautiful big clump of aspidistra, cast iron plant. That works real well till winter comes and all the leaves fall off the pecan tree, and then whatever you put underneath it absolutely roasts. So make careful notes about what is already there. And again, just X out anything you don't like and make plans to get rid of it. And like I say, it's... I love the question. Somebody came in one time wanting landscape help and wanted to know about their house. What direction does the house face? He looked at me and he said, well, to the front, of course. No, that doesn't cut it. I want to know whether it faces north or south or east or west. So, again, draw to scale. And, a lot of people will take and, in effect, divide the landscape project into different segments. And again, this is a beautiful thing. If you're starting out just creating a landscape, there are a lot of things you can do, and everybody thinks, okay, you're going to have a backyard and a front yard. That's not necessarily the case. If you want to create interesting little gardens, I once helped some folks design something where off the master bedroom, they put like a little private courtyard area out there, put a hot tub in it, a fountain, things like that. And it was their own little private sitting area. The kids could go off and have the run of the yard or whatever else. And they had this beautiful little courtyard garden that was theirs, that was pretty much off limit to the kids. Other people, if you love dogs, those of you all that hunt or those of you all that want to have big dogs or things like that, plan a dog run into the back of the yard. You don't necessarily have to give those puppies. Much as I love my puppies, my 2 labs at the ranch that I have for years, they had their own dog run, and when I wasn't at home, they were perfectly happy in that dog run. Now, granted, it was at least a third the size of this seminar area, had a good hard surface, which made it easy to clean, which is again a very important thing. Don't ever do a dog run with grass in it. But what you want, give the puppies their own place, so you're not forever fighting with them or arguing with them about what they ate or what they pulled up. You're looking at me with an 8-week-old lab puppy. I'm not sure what my yard's going to look like. But again, as part of the planning process, think about what those 4-legged members of the family are going to do. Now, if you love your dogs, but you also love your landscaping, there are options. There are ways to keep the dogs out of the landscape without having to build fences and things like that. You may want to do some of the planning first, but early in the process, look into one of these so-called invisible fence systems. There are a couple of different companies here in San Antonio. One is called Pet Stop. The other is called Invisible Fence. And they come in, they bury this wire. If you say, okay, let's pretend this is yard and we have the beds around here, they run this wire around the perimeter of the bed. The dog wears a collar, and it's not something that shocks them or anything else. It just kind of gives them a little warning signal if they get too close to it. I was delivering to a fellow over in Alamo Heights one time, and he had this huge lab. I pulled up, got a plant out of the truck, and here comes this giant lab charging out of the back door, charging down the driveway, and he just puts on the brakes and stops. And when the owner came out, I said, Keith, you know, you really have a well-trained dog. And he said, no, I don't. He said, there's a little wire runs across underneath there, and the dog knows not to cross point. So having pets doesn't mean that you can't necessarily, you know, have a little bit more elaborate landscape. There are good ways to keep the animals in. It's another good point too. Some people, you know, would like to not have a lot of fences or have a low fence, but they think they have to build a high fence to keep the dog in. Not necessarily. You can use the so-called invisible fences that will stop them with no fence whatsoever. On the other hand, something to consider in your landscaping, if you're in a fairly dense area and you want to create more privacy for yourself, higher fences are the way to go. But be sure and check with the community in which you're living to see if there's any prohibition against it. Here in San Antonio, you can't build a fence over 6 feet tall without a special variance. We faced that problem on this property, and well, actually when we built this property we wanted to have a fence up in between, so we just bought the property on both sides so nobody could say anything about it. But if you want to have a high fence, keep in mind that you may run into opposition from your city people. I personally, in dealing with governmental agencies, find that in general it's easier to get forgiveness than it is to get permission. But understand that if you go and build a big high fence or something like that, they may come in and insist that you not have it. You can always put up, you know, some, just some posts or something and grow Hines or whatever. But again, that's one of the most common questions I get, especially in San Antonio, where if you go way out north, some of the properties, you know, slope substantially. And your swimming pool, your outdoor deck or whatever, you may be looking up, the neighbors may be sitting on their deck looking down at you. So as you start the planning process, make note of areas that you need to screen off. That is one of the most important things. Again, don't think about what kind of plants you're going to use, but draw along this area. Mark on your plan, you know, I need to have something to give me a nice privacy barrier there. And if you have to have it instantly, then you probably are going to want to look at some hardscape type of thing, be it a gazebo or, you know, something of interest like that. If you give it a little while together to grow, then you can get by with using plants of one sort or another. But again, this planning process, just visualize, if you will, what you want it to look like 10 years into the future. Think about what your desires, what your needs are going to be 10 years into the future, or more for the most part. If you want to have a vegetable garden, go ahead and lay out on your plan where you're going to have that vegetable garden. Has to be in the sunniest part of the yard, and generally speaking, you'll probably want to put it somewhere that's out of sight, because there's a lot of different vegetable gardens aren't necessarily the most attractive things out there. And if you have a very shady lot, I've even known people to have a vegetable garden in the front yard. One guy I knew in Windcrest, he planted his tomatoes out right along the street. How he kept the people walking by from harvesting them, I don't know. But again, think about all those things that you want now or you think you would want in the future before you start doing all of your planting, before you start putting specific plants in. There are other things, you know, certainly to consider. Sun is probably the single most important thing. It will be good to put on your plan to make note of where the shadows are, what the shadiest part of the yard is. If you have a tall home, you know, you're going to have a lot more shade, and if you happen to be in an area where you're butted up fairly close against your neighbors and both of y'all have two-story homes, not going to be a whole lot of plants that need much sun that you're going to be able to grow in that little section between the houses. Doesn't mean you can't do some very interesting things with an area like that. But make careful note of how much sun an area gets, because that's going to be really critically important. So you're going to come up, you're going to have this plan, you're going to have it shaded in with which areas are in the shade, which areas are full sun. If you plan to put, even if you can't do it now, if you plan to put a deck or you know, a gazebo or something like that out there, have in mind where it's going to be, even if it's going to be several years into the future before you do it. One of the most important things is to decide if you're going to do anything that will require